time, so we're gonna get started. What these guys did is they scheduled me for 4:30 for an hour, right? And then they scheduled the raffle for 5 o'clock. And look where everybody just went after the last talk. So I was gonna talk, for an hour for about stuff like a dense web of reactivity as a handcrafted experience, and machine learning will enable dynamic NPCs and reactivity-generated quests, and I'm not going to do that. So we're going to keep this brief so that you can all go to the raffle, all right? So instead, what I'm going to talk about is the single most important thing about designing for role-playing games. But we're going to get to that. So first we're going to have context. Okay, so the context is that role-playing games first appeared 49 years ago in 1974. So they're a brand new art form. And when they first appeared, when that first edition of Dungeons & Dragons came out, it was crappy, okay? It was terrible. But it had a really, really great idea in it. It had an idea that has fundamentally changed the last 50 years of entertainment. But it was so terribly presented that everybody looked at it and said, wow, that's a brilliant idea. I could do that better. And so that's where the subsequent great profusion of role-playing games came from. But I started playing role-playing games just a couple of months after the first white box D&D came out. And I went to work for publishers of D&D in the late 70s. I worked with Gary Gygax on the first Dungeon Master's Guide. And then I went into video games in the early 80s, where I've been ever since. And I worked on lots of different kinds of games, including narrative games with Sid Meier at Microprose, and then went to AOL and was head of games for them in the 90s, and helped to birth the online role-playing game business. And then I was done with management, so I went back into writing, and where I've been ever since. I was on Elder Scrolls Online as the lore master for 8 or 9 years, and now I'm back doing another Dungeons & Dragons game. I'm working for Larian Studios at their Dublin studio on Baldur's Gate 3 as a lead narrative designer. Okay, so I have a bit of a history on role-playing games. Role-playing games exist because people want to be in stories. Because before RPGs, every story was that you got excited about was in a book or in a movie or in a comic book, and it was a thing that you could experience. When you read a novel, I write novels too. This is one of my translations. When you read a novel, it's a finished thing, right? It's all in here. And your contribution to it is to read it. And what you really want to do, though, is be in there. You want to do that stuff. So you want to be in a video game. Or in a role-playing game that you play with your friends, ideally. Because what's really compelling about role-playing games is that it is an experience that is ideally, and this is one of the most powerful things about it from the get-go, it is ideally a collective experience. It's an experience that comes from you deciding the kinds of adventure that you want to have, the kind of story that you want to have, but you don't get to have it just by yourself. You got to have it with these other bozos. And you're going to riff off each other, like jazz musicians, making stuff up as you go. And a lot of the time, it's just hilarious. Okay? And you can't have that kind of fun any other way. And that kind of fun has only existed for 50 years. So we're still making it up, man, every day. And that's what's great about working in RPGs still, is that we're still making shit up every day that nobody ever did before. And one of the things that's really cool about that is nobody could tell you it's wrong, right? Because nobody ever did it before. So you're making up new things. But the function of what we're making up and what has been made up since the beginning in the original version of Dungeons and Dragons and all of the profusion of editions that have come since and all of the many other kinds of games that have been published to enable you to have different kinds of stories in different genres with different groups of people with different goals, is that these are the tools to enable you, who are not a professional storyteller, to be in a story that feels like it's as professional as whatever whatever you read in this finished piece of serial work. So the goal over time, as we have advanced and refined tabletop games and come up with different tools to enable multiplayer gaming that's supported by computers or through computers or with computers, it's all to get you closer to an experience that is as polished and as immersive as you get when you watch a movie or read a comic book or read a novel, where they spend a whole lot of time bringing you into the world, right? So a role-playing game aspires to put you in the world pretty quickly so that you can have the tools then to grasp what you need to feel immersed and to feel like what you're doing is as consequential and as meaningful, and the choices you are making are as significant as the choices the protagonist makes in the novel. Even if the experience is ragged, right? Even if you're playing with bozos, and there's weird stuff happening, the point of it is that you are making the choices, and so when the cool stuff happens, the emotional impact is like an order of magnitude more than when it happens to the guy in the book. And you remember it because you did it yourself, because you were given the tools. So, what we are aspiring to do is to give you tools to make that, as I said, as polished as possible. So, the thing is that in order to do that, whether you're making a tabletop game or whether you're making a video game, whether it's an MMORPG with thousands of players or whether it's just a multiplayer game with 4 to 8 players or whatever, that takes a lot of people. That takes a lot of different disciplines, artistic disciplines working together, because these are fundamentally handcrafted experiences. They're not particularly dynamically generated, not yet. And so, like, the team of people making Baldur's Gate 3 is 400 of us, okay? And they're pretty much 400 role-playing fanatics. So when you're working in that environment, you have to be profoundly collaborative, right? You got to work with all these people. They've all got different ideas of what should go into this thing. So you have to work with them, and you have to be able to screen and filter and figure out which of these great ideas actually belong in this game, right? And you got to throw all kinds of stuff out, and it's heartbreaking, but you got to focus on what this game is about, right? And so you work with these collaborators, and it takes years, and you build this huge thing. And the thing is that unlike this, even when you finish it, it's not finished. Because it goes out to the players, and then the players, all unique, all come to this thing that you've built, and they put in their particular choices, and they make their decisions about what's going to happen. And then there is an experience that comes out of that that is singular and unique and ephemeral and is just that playthrough. And that is the final product. That is the final game. That is the final experience. That is the final emotionally resonant, climactic adventure if it works. And so that means that when you are being a collaborator, working all together to build this game, you are all the time keeping in mind, if you're good at this, that your ultimate collaborator is the players. You are making it so that they can tell the story that they want. And it doesn't finish until they do what they want with it. Which means that you have to be thinking all the time about, what do they want? What are they going to want out of this? And they're all unique, and they're all bringing different desires and different experiences to it. And so this is the really really difficult goal, is to be able to make a game that offers every player the ability to make a final experience out of it that is theirs. That means that you have to take into account who they have chosen to be. What class, in the case of a D&D game, what species, what is their background. And then even more, you have to take into account the choices that they make along the way, and there have to be a lot of them. And they have to be meaningful choices. They have to make a difference in what happens. And then you have to record that difference. You have to track it. You have to have a web of reactivity that takes into account all the decisions that the player has made 100 hours ago and 30 seconds ago. And then, if you can do that with enough density and with enough fidelity to what feels right, then you give them an experience that is theirs alone. So the big single secret, the big single most important thing about RPG design is that you're making a thing to give it away. And if you're not making it to like give away to other people, to let them do it, if you're feeding them your story and letting them discover it by the choices that they make, right? If you've got a way in mind whereby it's the right way to play the game, right? You're doing it wrong. The right way to play the game is the way you want to play it. And so when you design a role-playing game, if you do it right, you give the player every chance to make heroic and vile and stupid and brilliant choices. And if you do it, if you do that, then every single player is going to have their own final experience of this. And furthermore, you can play through this and then go back and do it again, and it will be different. And you'll get paid off for making different choices and seeing what those different choices do for you. And then you can go back and do it again, and it's still different. So what I'm saying is, if we make Baldur's Gate 3 right, you'll never need to buy another game in your life. What time is it? It's almost time for the raffle?
10.
10 till? Okay. So that's my little sermon. So now we've got a few minutes for questions about that, about the history of role-playing games. What's my favorite aperitif? Yes, sir.
So, in what you're saying, sounds great. Where do you feel die rolls come into it all? Because that's kind of a choice, but it's kind of not a choice. So how does that help?
Because it makes you aware of risk and reward. And so specifically when you come up with a die roll in, we're doing a game based on 5th edition D&D rules. So when you come up with a die roll, you can see what the DC is. And this is the same thing with a tabletop game, right? The DM tells you, make a 15. You got to make a DC 15 on this roll, right? So now you know that's a hard thing. And then you have to decide, do I want to do that? Because if I fail, there's going to be a consequence to failure. So maybe I should try something else. Or, wow, if I could pull that off, that would be fabulous. And so you got to make you got to make a DC 15, and you've got negatives because you've made stupid choices, and so you roll the dice, and if you fail, you go, well, yeah, I saw that coming. And if you make it, man, that feels great. So dice are emotional intensifiers. I just made that up right now. Yes.
So the dice roll thing, I mean, one of the things that people are saying about dungeon mastering now is that when somebody rolls a dice, the DM is not someone who says, well, that's what happens. It's someone who says, yes, and this is what can happen.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're a long, long way from where a computer will ever be able to be a dungeon master in the same way that your dungeon master can go, right, well, you failed disastrously, but for whatever reason, given the character of the group and the
Right,
players.
and that's why I'm telling you not to quit playing tabletop games, because tabletop games are fabulous, all right? And they do things differently than a computer game can currently do. So you're absolutely right about that, but you won't be right forever, because it's going to incrementally get better, because we are going to, through machine learning, we are going to start to be able to recognize the patterns of the choices you make. And those patterns will affect what choices you're offered. So that will then give you, through your choices, another way to vary the experience in a direction that is toward what you have shown an interest in doing, right? And that's similar to what your game master does, what your dungeon master does at the table, is like he'll tell you here's what happens, and then he's going to look at the faces, and that's going to tell him which direction to go next or how far to take it, right? And computers can't do that yet, but they can. But they track everything, so every piece of data can be interpreted, so eventually, we will incrementally move toward giving you a more tailored experience in that way. Yes.
How do you? What metric do you use to know when you have enough variety? Like, in choice, in response. I know it's subjective, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Okay, so the metric is when the player says, I'm going to try to do this, they don't have this covered.
Yeah.
And then you've got it covered. And then you go, wow, that's really good. And so, if you can more than half of the time fool your players into thinking that they're not going to get something and then giving it to them and delighting them that you have in fact covered that particular combination of bizarre events, that permutation of choices and decisions that were made, we aim to do that as often as we can. And if we do that more often than other games, then we're just ahead of the curve and we're doing fine. Right?
Can I ask a follow-up as well? Is like, do you give guidance to your writers on you should have this many choices, or is it just by intuition on the writer's part?
No, absolutely. What we do is we keep doing passes, right? So we do a pass for, here's the basic events that happen in this situation. right? And then we go back and say, all right, what if the party's got a bard in it? Okay, that's gonna open up other possibilities, other options that wouldn't occur if the party didn't have a bard in it. What if that bard was a drow? Well, then we got to open up different possibilities for that too, right? So you go back through and you do what we call reactivity passes, in which what you do is you just make it really more goddamn complicated. And at the moment, all of that stuff is, as I said, it's handcrafted and it's hardwired, right? But over time, that will become. We will be able to come up with the parameters for making those kinds of responses dynamically adjusted on the fly. So then the game will look at your party and say, who's in here, and what options do I need to offer, that will be both, that makes things a bit more generic because you can only cover so many bases. But it also, it's shallow but broad, right? So right now what we've got is narrow but deep, So we need to hit in between. So we'll be adding more different kinds of that kind of stuff as we go on in future games.
Thanks.
This one's almost done, so no more, nothing else going in it.
As far as video games and that go, obviously they have that difference to real life games in that sense that, like you said, it's AI and it's doing what you're telling it to, and you're giving it so many options and stuff, which is a great thing. But how do you allow for rule of cool and stuff like that? Is there a way you're ever going to be able to do that kind of thing? So say you said, you come up with something that's particularly kind of strange that you might want to do within a game.
Yeah, we just put it in. So you're always just going to put it in. That's fine. The stuff that I was just referring to, the dynamically generated stuff, will add primarily quantity to the experience. Okay, quality of the experience, the seriously unexpected stuff, is still going to come from designers who have a brainstorm. And it's the same thing in a tabletop game when the dungeon master sees where things are going and goes, oh, wow, I've got a great idea how to make this work, and they invent shit on the fly, and serendipitous stuff happens that neither the players nor the dungeon master were ever expecting, right? So you have to try to think of that serendipity in advance, if you can. Occasionally, that happens. That's why you need 400 people.
I have some submitted questions if there's no more questions in the room.
Okay,
right.
we shall submit.
Okay. Sorry, no, if there is another question in the room, I'll hold it.
No.
Was there another one? No, sorry.
We will submit to your submitted questions.
Owen McFallon asks, have you ever played WFRP, first edition? For example, the Doomstones campaign or Enemy Within, and what did you think of them?
Okay, Enemy Within is brilliant. One of the main designers in that is Graham Davis, who's a friend of mine. He's and he's still active and was involved in the recent revision and updating of the Enemy Within. So those were brilliant when they first came out, and they have made changes to keep them from being dated and old-fashioned now. So those are still worth people's time.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. I have one from Michael Cosgrave. I think you might be in the room.
Yeah, that's me. Which one?
I have in Heroic Worlds. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, because it occurred to me, I moved
That looks familiar.
3 boxes of Rollmaster supplements to get this off the shelf. And I started looking through it and thinking at the sort of things that people were writing back then.
That's a book I wrote 30 years ago, okay?
Well, this is the interesting thing that struck me about the 30 years ago, because now in Kickstarter, and there's things in here like a book of village maps. So here's a book with 30 village maps, and I'm seeing that people are still doing the same type of thing. You see it on Kickstarter, you see it on drive-through, And it's kind of like the old, I've forgotten his name, the Italian socialist who said every generation rewrites their own history. Does every generation rewrite its own role-playing supplements? And what do you see different now in the texture and quality of what's coming out versus what was there when you read each and every one of these?
Skimmed. To a certain extent, yes, people are recapitulating the past and redoing stuff, and simply, I mean, there's stuff that's up on Drive-Thru-RPG that was done 35 years ago and it's just being reprinted. But it's what it speaks to is the need of players to have things for their tabletop games, data and pre-cooked simple stuff, so that you don't have to spend a whole lot of time on preparing that stuff. So it's like having some prepared ingredients before making a big meal, right? It's good to have some things that are already ready, and so that's useful. Now, over time, as tabletop rule sets have become more refined, so have the supporting materials as well. We were talking about this morning. More and more of that stuff is going to be available digitally and almost instantaneously, and so you will be able to, in the middle of a session, especially if you're playing digitally, a dungeon master is going to be able to call for something that they didn't know that they needed until the moment that they needed it, and then they'll find it, and then it'll be available to them. So that's going to be, that particular aspect of things will be easier.
Perfect. I have maybe two more.
All right.
So that we won't go too.
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to go to the raffle, so
Of
it's
course,
cool.
I know. I asked to hold a few minutes so that we can get through some of these because we're clearly enjoying it. At what stage in the early days of D&D did you realise that you were onto something big?
Oh, instantly.
Instantly.
I was in college when D&D came out, and a fellow student, a friend of mine who was another guy in the science fiction club, was also another war gamer, board gamer, card gamer like I was, and he went to a science fiction convention, and he came back he played D&D at the science fiction convention. The guy's name was Tom Moldvay, which you might recognize because he did a bunch of early designs. And he had played D&D at the convention. Instantly realized that this was a thing that we needed in our lives. Borrowed a copy of the game, went out to a copy shop and copied about 3/4 of it. The stuff he felt he needed. And this was back when copies were 10 cents a page, which is like half €1 now, right? So. So he came back with this fragmentary copy of Dungeons and Dragons, and we didn't know that polyhedral dice existed, right? So we had to go over this thing like interpreting. It was like the Rosetta Stone, right? I was trying to figure out what, but the underlying concept was still crystal clear, and it was so powerful that we instantly started running games for each other and getting all our friends and stuff like that. And somebody went out, I forget who, and actually paid the staggering sum of $10 for the actual box game so that we could have all the rules that were available at the time. And so having been people who were dedicated to stories, right? Science fiction, fantasy, all that stuff, and dedicated to gaming. Here was the confluence. Here was the way whereby you could tell stories with all your friends, get them in on the gag, even if they were shitty storytellers, because it didn't matter, because you had the tools. All of a sudden, you had the tools to tell stories together, and make it work. And have a great time. So yeah, it was instantaneous. The light went on.
Thank you. What is the best class to play, and why is it Paladin? That comes from one of our leaders in the club.
Unbiased.
Because one of the most fun things in the world is to be a self-righteous jerk. So and that's all there is to say about that.
Do you think that a TPK is a good thing, or could be a good thing?
Usually not. The thing is but that's in a tabletop game, right? In a tabletop game, it's just a big fat bummer because everything has gone wrong, and it's gonna. It costs a significant effort to pull everybody back together and start over and do something again. Now, in a video game, who the hell cares? You got a save game, and let's not pretend that the medium of video games, people don't save games and play things over so they can see them coming out a different way, because that's just the nature of the beast. And so you take advantage of that, and you assume and you design to that. So when that happens in a video game, if there's a TPK, the only thing that's really important is that the player has to feel that they know what happened and how to avoid it next time. Right? Then you have got a properly designed combat system or a dialogue resolution system or whatever, where so they can look at their choices and not say, oh Jesus, did I screw up, right? But they can say, I know what to do next time, and then that assures them next time, and they go back to it, and you need never buy another game again.
And the last one that I'll give.
Okay.
What's the single thing you are most proud of career-wise? What's your biggest moment?
Well, I was just asked, earlier today, what's my favorite game, and the thing is that it always has to be the thing you're making right now, right? Even if sometimes you're working on a game that probably isn't going to ship, which happens far too often than it should, but nonetheless, if you're not really invested in making this game and delivering its particular coolness to the players, you can't get up and go into the office. So it has to be the thing you're working on right now. So that's what makes it exciting to do this particularly draining career, for decades on end. Yes, last
What's
question.
your second favorite game?
Oh.
Okay, and on that note, I will point out finally that I am also a guy named Lawrence Ellsworth who writes, edits, and translates historical fiction, and I'm wrapping up. This is volume 6 of my complete Musketeer novels of Alexander Dumas, which is the latest one. Number 7 is running currently in serial on Substack. And I've got a book coming out in the summer called Cinema of Swords from Applause Books, which is about swashbuckling movies, knights and Vikings and samurai and Zorro and everybody who solves their problem with a sword instead of their brains. So look for that book. That's it. We're done.
Perfect.
Go to the wrap up.